Chers collègues, mesdames et messieurs, non, je vais continuer in English. Everybody knows how much time and energy it takes to prepare a paper, but I think it is less known that it takes also a lot of time to prepare the introduction of the author of a paper. Yesterday, at least, I spent an hour or more thinking about how to introduce Professor Godelier to this audience. Should I present all the usual trifles, where he was educated and where he received his degrees, how he came to the Baruya of New Guinea, and how many years he spent to study the culture and society? Should I name all his important books and the many awards and prizes he received? Should I talk about the important role he played in the recent debate on art premier and the establishment of the Musée Camproli? Or should I even mention that he is an officer of the Légion d'honneur? Eventually, I decided to drop this all. It is not necessary in this audience, at least everybody knows who Maurice Godelier is. According to my view, there were two French anthropologists who contributed most prominently to the development of anthropological thinking in the second half of the 20th century. One of them was Michel Leiris, who died in 1990, and the other, Claude Lévi-Strauss, who will celebrate his 100th birthday at the end of this year. But actually, however, I think there's still a third one who did not only influence anthropology of the late 20th century, but is still exerting a big influence of our contemporary, of our current anthropological thinking, the thinking of the 21st century, Maurice Godelier. We are very proud to welcome him for a third time at our institute after 1998, when he was one of the keynote speakers at the Frankfurt conference of the European Association of Social Anthropologists. After 2003, when he gave the Jensen Memorial Lectures at the Frobenius-Institut, and now exactly 5 more years later for the talk of tonight. When I invited him for our series, The End of Anthropology, Maurice Godelier was the only one, I have to confess, who reacted to this provocation as I imagined people would react. This means he was very angry. What a nonsense, he wrote me back. There is no end of anthropology. Its future has just begun. And out of his anger, he proposed the title of his two-day talk, More Than Ever in a Global World, Anthropology is Worth the Trouble.
Thank you very much. I don't know if I stay, if I stand up a long time because I have problems with my back. So if I cannot support the pain, I sit down, okay? I have changed the title. Yes, I have changed the title, not the content. So in today's world, anthropology is more important than ever. So really, I have changed it. So, be patient, it's a bit longer. So my first words are to thank Professor Karl-Heinz Kohl and his colleagues at the Frobenius-Institut for their invitation to lectures in this series entitled The End of Anthropology. For some of our colleagues, this title inspires a certain fear. For others, on the contrary, it expresses hope. For me, and I am not alone, the problem, the end of anthropology, is already behind us. But whatever our reaction, the question itself grew out of the fact that for a number of years, beginning somewhere in the 80s for anthropology and slightly earlier for the literary disciplines, the social sciences and the humanities, at that time they entered a period of crisis which called into questions their concept, methods, and more fundamentally, their legitimacy. Some of our colleagues denied that the work of the anthropologists who had gone before lacked any scientific authority, as did their own work before they became aware of the fictitious and ideological character of the narratives, constructed by Western anthropologists to disseminate what they claim to have understood about other forms of culture and society. The crucial question for that anthropology, history, archaeology, and other social sciences have struggled to answer since the beginning is, how can we come to understand and to explain the existence of facts, of attitude, of representations that have never been part of our own way of living and thinking? That is the question we have, all of us, we share, historians, anthropologists, archaeologists. How can we understand things we have never been part of our life? Obviously, the question is not restricted to scientific knowledge alone. It arises each time that, for various reasons, human individuals or groups are brought to interact with other individuals or groups from different social groups, classes, within their own society, or from societies profoundly different from their own. Understanding the otherness of others means discovering the meanings and the reasons behind the forms of thought and lifestyles of those who are different from you. It means discovering what relationships these others have among themselves, which positions they occupied in these relationships, and how they represent themselves to themselves. But understanding is not yet explaining. To explain is to seek, to discover how the different social ways of existing, of living, of thinking, of feeling we have managed to understand appear here and there over time and space, and were reproduced sometimes over several centuries, sometimes over several millennia, even as they change sometimes profoundly. For example, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, they are going on and changing. From Morgan to Lévi-Strauss, from Malinowski to Salins, anthropologists have believed that, with the help of their concept and method, it was possible to gain knowledge of the social and cultural otherness of others at a distance, which would therefore be relatively objective. And each believed he or she was contributing to this in his own or her own way. But it was precisely this claim to knowledge, this faith in the methods, concepts, and theories developed to achieve it that some of us began in the 80s to contest, thus setting off a crisis that was far from being wholly negative, as we will see. Why this challenge and what is the resulting crisis. A look at the context of the 1980s may help answer us to understand. In 1945, I go back because we have to reconstruct the history of our discipline and the intellectual field in which the question raised before. In 1945, Europe emerged victorious from a war with Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, imperialist Japan, that had bled it wide and made the United States the first world power, ahead of Soviet Russia. It was in this new balance of power that between 1955 and 1970, the last European colonial empire disappeared, one after the other, either in the wake of bloody wars of liberation, like in France, or more peacefully. From then on, it was no longer possible to say that colonizing meant civilizing. Civilizing meant helping other people advance more quickly on the path towards the progress already achieved by the West. Liberated from direct domination of the European powers, the former colonies and now independent nations took a different path of development. But between 1980 and 1990, and I was in Berlin in 1989, another global upheaval occurred in the form of accelerated disintegration and long-awaited collapse of the communist regimes set up after the World War II in Central and Eastern Europe, but also in Asia, Far East, Africa, in Cuba. Today, only a few shreds remain of that. These two upheavals profoundly modified the West's relationships with the rest of the world, but also with itself. And they would go on to shape the intellectual world that grew up in Europe and the United States after the Second World War. And it is now the beginning of the crisis. In effect, after the First World War, the Russian Revolution appeared to many intellectuals, and not only to intellectuals, as the birth of a new world and a new kind of man, as the next stage in the process of humanity, progress of humanity. This progress was to consist, as you know, in doing away with the capitalist economic market system, the exploitation of human labor, the wasting of the natural resources that underpin this system. It also meant replacing the so-called bourgeois form of democracy, serving the owning classes, by a higher form of democracy that would serve the people. In short, once again, the West, but another West, held itself up as the measure and the mirror of human progress. It must be recalled here that the West is not singular. The West is plural. And it was the West itself that spawned the critique of the economic and political system, which gave it its strength. It is therefore understandable that at the end of the Second War, in which Russia has fought on the side of the Allies and greatly contributed to their victory, before the socialist regime showed themselves for what they were, dictatorships that exploited the masses, the dominant intellectual trends in the social sciences and philosophy, at least in France, I speak about my country. What was the situation when I was young? The dominant intellectual trends in Paris were Marxism, Althusser, structuralism, Lévi-Strauss, existentialism, Sartre. Sartre positioned on the inalienable liberty of the individual, the freedom of individuals, opposed him to the Marxists and to Lévi-Strauss. There was a big discussion between Lévi-Strauss and Sartre. When I was assistant of Lévi-Strauss, it was very interesting. And Lévi-Strauss and Althusser, they were arguing for the existence of impersonal structures, whether conscious or unconscious, and their structural consequences. But in the political arena, Sartre rapidly relied to the partisans of revolution to bring down the bourgeois order. That was the situation in Paris. Everybody was against the regime, the bourgeois society, with different approach, as you know. Now you will understand why it is Lyotard, as you know, who used the first time the postmodern condition. The successive disappearance of the colonial empires and of the socialist regimes shook the intelligentsia, European and French intelligentsia, and sparked a crisis that brought us, as Lyotard said at that time, into the postmodern condition. For Lyotard, this new condition meant two things for thinkers. First, it meant the death of all meta-narratives, in other words, of explanation of history and of the complex diversity of societies in terms of a first cause, a first and efficient cause in the last analysis, such as the notion of mode of production for Marxists, or unconscious structure of the mind for Lévi-Strauss. Finish. Second, the postmodern condition for Lyotard necessarily meant a return to the subject as the actor of his or her history. So you see that the two transformations, we are in 1980 in Paris. This was illustrated in France by the second part of Foucault's work. Foucault, when he was young, he was like Lévi-Strauss and Althusser. He was advocating and proclaiming the death of the subject, structure, no subject. But the second Foucault devoted his last part of life to analyzing the subjectivation process of individuals in various institutions structured by what he called the régime de pouvoir, regime of power, relations of power. Having come this far, it seemed clear, at least in France, that the next urgent task, that was not in the States, the next urgent task of theory was to deconstruct. And deconstruction was Derrida's formula. So from Lyotard to Derrida, through Foucault, end of the narrative, meta-narrative, return of the subject, deconstruction of all the disciplines and humanities and literature. Well, there is in itself nothing surprising about deconstructing a discipline, nothing. It is a necessary and normal moment in the development of all sciences, natural as well as social. It is something that has to be done following the appearance of new ways of interpreting well-known facts or in the face of new facts. But there are two ways to deconstruct a discipline. One leads to its dissolution and eventual disappearance, deconstructing and dissolving and disappearing. The other, based on the positive critiques produced during the deconstruction process, the positive critiques produced during the deconstruction process, paves the way for the reconstruction of this same discipline on new foundations, which are more rigorous, more critical, and therefore analytically more effective than they were before. It is therefore indispensable today to point out a few or some of the positive criticism of anthropology, since this positive criticism already enable us to reconstruct, to begin rebuilding anthropology. Furthermore, the very existence of these critics shows that we must not confuse all the publications and the authors that fly the post-modernist flag. Marcus is not Rabino. James Clifford is not Capanzano. Stephen Tyler is not Michael Fisher. And none of them were Clifford Geertz, who inspired them. Each is only himself. So no amalgam. But before listing some of the positive results of critique of anthropology, I feel it is important to show that your topic, the end of anthropology, falls into the first way of deconstructing the discipline, and which leads to his disappearance. You understand I am not on this side. No? How in effect a discipline can disappear? How a scientific discipline can disappear? In two ways. A discipline can disappear because its object disappears, or because although its object still exists, the discipline that claimed to bring us to know it prove incapable of doing so. So either the object disappears, either the discipline is not able to understand the object. Let us take the first hypothesis. As the object of anthropology disappeared, the Nuer, the Kachin, the Barouya, the Tikopia, the French, and so on, have not disappeared. They exist. But their societies, their ways of living and thinking change under colonial rule and are still changing. But does a science disappear because its object evolve? In this case, the discipline of history would have ceased to exist long time ago, since all of the past societies history is studying have either disappeared or still exist, but in a completely different forms. Perhaps anthropology should disappear because a large portion, I give you an example, of the Trobriand Islanders today, they live in Los Angeles or in New Zealand. I mean, the majority of the people from Tikopia, they don't live in Tikopia, they make money in Los Angeles or in New Zealand. They did not disappear, they changed. But maybe implicitly, some people have still in their mind that anthropology has no object other than the so-called primitive, traditional, pre-industrial, non-urban, not Western societies. In effect, this presupposition is an ideological a priori that anthropology already was forced to combat at the time of the publication of Morgan, at the very beginning, when Morgan published Ancient Society, in which the author divided all societies into 3 stages along a scale of human progress, that went from savage to barbaric to civilization and so on. The anthropologists fought against Morgan, and that was Boas who criticized Morgan for that sort of view, that anthropology was only for the primitive or the barbarians. So the fight against that is from the beginning, from the very beginning. Today, if you look at what is anthropology, you have medical anthropology, gender studies, gay and lesbian kinship, and so on. So anthropology is every day transforming, renovating, creating new fields of research. Let us now look at the second reason that might cause the disappearance of our discipline. As we saw, The question asked by anthropology, by history, by other social sciences is always the same. How can we come to understand and explain the existence of what has never been part of my life, of my own way of thinking and feeling and living? The argument no longer concerns the disappearance of the object, but the inability of anthropology to exist as a science. According to this reasoning, since it came into being, anthropology has done nothing but produce ethnographic accounts that are no more than the projection of the ideology of Western observers onto the societies they study. Two critical positions can be found in this line of thought. The first is that held by George Marcus, who nonetheless tendered the hope of a new ethnography. The second is the radically critical position of Stephen Tyler, who disputes that a new ethnography is even possible. Not for Stephen Tyler, no more ethnography. For Marcus and Clifford, the ethnographies written by Malinowski, Leach, Evans Pritchard, and many others were mainly narrative fictions, written with the complicity, and I quote, of the two parties engaged in getting to know another society, the ethnologist and his informants, producing, I quote, fictions that each side accepts. Fictions that each side accepts. Marcus, however, believes that we can do otherwise and better. But for Stephen Tyler, all ethnographic accounts are fated to be merely, and I quote, a reality fantasy of a fantasy reality. I can give you all the quotation and references. A fantasy reality, a reality fantasy of a fantasy reality. I am going to explain you. In this opinion, anthropology as a science was stillborn from the beginning. For, and I quote, any ethnographic account is neither an object to be represented, nor the representation of an object. No object of any kind precedes and constrains ethnography. Ethnography creates its own objects in its unfolding, and the reader supplies the rest. Here we recognize the theoretical position of Derrida and Paul de Man, for whom it was mandatory, and I quote, to deconstruct the illusion of reference, the possibility that a text could refer to a non-textual reality, a text without any context. Yet it is difficult, I tell you, to believe that the events and practices of other societies reported by anthropologists were all hallucination, a fantasy reality, and that, for example, the attacks of September 11 claimed by Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda were no more than TV show, a reality fantasy. Difficult to think. So I see that most of the critics bear on a single aspect of the anthropologist's trade. On the moment the anthropologist attempts to give a written account or filmic account of his fieldwork and subsequent analysis. But I have two critiques to make to this critique. First, an ethnographic monograph is not a literary work. Even if you have a good style, it is not a piece of poetry, not a novel. For two reasons. Compare with Shakespeare. Shakespeare and compare with, I don't know, Evans Pritchard. No? Evans Pritchard and Shakespeare, no? Okay. Macbeth. Macbeth was a character which sprung from the mind of Shakespeare, but not Venuaire. Venuaire. And the Kula of Malinowski existed before Malinowski, and it is going on today in Oceania. The Kula is going on now. Before and after the anthropologists, the object is still there changing. Second problem, you cannot refute Shakespeare. You go to the theater, you see, but you cannot add anything to Shakespeare. You cannot rewrite Macbeth. Stupid, totally stupid. But you can rewrite Malinowski. You can go back and say Malinowski was wrong or right and so on, and check again 50 years. It has been done by 4, 5, 6 anthropologists, very well known, very well known. Annette Weiner, Fred Damon, Nancy Moon, and so on. They came back, they went, they studied again, and they saw that Malinowski has missed 2 basic concepts of the Kula, the concept of Keda and the concept of Kitum. And so they completed and corrected, but you cannot complete Shakespeare. So that was wrong, to take ethnography as a literary process. It is not. But the 2 problems are not only the writing of anthropology, there are 2 other problems not dealt with, and I was surprised to see my colleagues always speaking about writing ethnography, writing culture, and not coming back to the process of observing people. What does it mean to observe people? What does it mean, observation participante? What does it mean? Nobody speaks about that. Participation. What does it mean to observe and to participate when you live, like me, 7 years among the Barouya? What does it mean to live with, to observe? So, I think I shall come back to this the problem in a few minutes, but I want to add 2 positive critiques launched by Marcus and others. One is, and I think one important point was to always underline the fact of the absence or quasi-absence in the publication of numerous anthropologists of any analysis of the colonial situation and the colonial relationships inflicted on the population even as the anthropologists were carrying out their fieldwork. Even Pritchard, for instance, alludes once to the presence of British troops having arrived to subdue the tribes around where he was working. 3 lines about the colonial troop coming on the same place. But not all the anthropologists have passed over the colonial context of their work in silence. Take Firth, who is clear about what was happening in Tikopia. In France, there was a woman, Germaine Tillon, who died now. She was in Algeria during the French War, and she protested publicly. She explained the situation. She did not conceal anything about the colonial situation, the French colonial situation in Algeria. She just died now. She was 100 years old, just before Lévi-Strauss. He's not dead yet. Now, another point, very important, is the critique of the notion of progress and civilization, especially since the Western ideology of progress is not dead. It has simply mutated into the ideology of human rights, les droits de l'homme, maintenant, droits de l'homme. So, with human rights You can judge other societies, and you can even interfere into their development. No? You go to Iraq. So it is difficult. It is a very ambiguous concept, and it is necessary to criticize. On all these points, subaltern and post-colonial studies have picked up where the first critics left off. And so, for me, post-colonial and subaltern studies have made a considerable contribution, positive now, to anthropology. Another point, very important, launched by Georges Marcus and others, is the fact that anthropology publishing should speak with a plurality of voices, the notion of plurality of voices, and not only that of the anthropologists. But of course, there was a risk that all of these voices, all the voices, the plurality of voices, would then be claimed to be equally valid, and that the anthropologists would have nothing specific to add that would give any particular weight in this concert. Other critics arose not from, and that is very important, not from the critique of colonial situation, but from our evolution in our society. For instance, the fact that the gender studies, all the forms of exclusion, segregation for color, skin, for many things, it is in Western countries every day that we have contests about. And if you look at, for instance, James Clifford, when he reread Godfrey Linart's the beautiful book on the religion of the Dinka, James Clifford was right. He said, look, in that beautiful book, there is only 2 lines about women. It's only one woman explaining to the anthropologists what the cattle, main things, the cattle was for men. So only one voice of one woman to speak about one society. He was right. He was right. But at the same time, you know that it is difficult in many societies for a man like me to do field work with women, with Baruya women. It's not easy. Not because I am white, but because I am man. So it is difficult. You cannot be man and woman at the same time. It's more easy for a white anthropologist woman to be with Baruya men than for a man to be with Baruya women. You understand? Because a white woman is taken for a man. A white woman is taken by the Baruya as a man, just like, because she is white. So she is not quite a woman. So. Well, a final point in this retrospective of positive contribution made by postmodern criticism is this thing, the rejection of any essentialist interpretation of the otherness of others. That is clear now. This is not a new criticism. In the first decade of the 20th century, Boas had already shown that Northwest American Indian societies were all opened and borrowed from each other. So he showed that they were by no means totalities, a society as a totality closed in around its essence. So that was also already done at the beginning of the 20th century. The désessentialisation of anthropology and societies. Okay. So, in short, there is nothing in all of these criticisms, postmodern or not, to indicate that we are going through what Salins calls the twilight of anthropology, le crépuscule de l'anthropologie. The conclusion is clear. We must keep on deconstructing. We must keep on deconstructing, but so as to reconstruct on foundation better equipped to meet the challenge of the globalized world in which we will live and we will work in the 20th century, 21st century. So, now, I would like to spend the rest of this lecture on the question I raised at the outset. How can we come to understand the otherness of others? There is no other question. And I want to show how and why I believe anthropology is better able than it was in the past, better than in the past, to provide an answer, but on certain conditions. Which conditions? First, the social and historical otherness of others must be relative and not absolute. If it is absolute, there is no knowledge. So a Chinese, I must understand him or her, and the difference must be relative and not absolute. Second condition, others must be capable of understanding that which humans invented for the purpose of interpreting the world around them and themselves within this world, and therefore for the purpose of acting on the world as well as on themselves, whether it be the Aboriginal Dreamtime, Mahayana Buddhism, and so on. But it is also essential to stress that while humans can understand the social otherness of others, they are not obliged to espouse the principles and values that produce this otherness, nor are they obliged to practice them themselves. So, to be an anthropologist, you know, is to exercise a profession that entails the production of verifiable and therefore refutable knowledge. The anthropologist's aim and methods are not those of a missionary, the soldier, the merchant, who intervene in societies that are not there. But in order to exercise his profession, it is not enough for the otherness of others to be knowable, but the anthropologist has to have acquired the means to learn about this otherness. So, what to do to become an anthropologist? What we have to do to become an anthropologist? We must begin by constructing our own cognitive ego. Every anthropologist has to construct in himself or herself a cognitive ego which is different from his social ego and his intimate ego. The social ego can be inherited from birth. We are the son of, we are the daughter of a Brahmin, or the social ego is constructed over the course of a lifetime. The intimate ego is fashioned from birth by painful or pleasant encounters with others. This is the ego of desire, of pleasures, of sufferings, the ego that fashions sensibility, and sensibility is also a way of being and understanding others, being with others. But of course, social ego and intimate ego are inextricably intertwined, and in this the anthropologist is no different from other people. What distinguishes the anthropologist or the historians is that he must construct yet another ego, a cognitive ego. What is a cognitive ego? What is? First, it is an intellectual ego that is put together before leaving. When I was young, I went to the university, as some people, you know, and you learn concept, theories, discussions, controversies, and so on. You can learn that at the university or somewhere else, you know. And all these components, mental, we can say mental component of your ego, are bearing the mark of the time. At one time, one student is a structuralist, at another time he is a post-structuralist, depending on the time, But whatever the epoch, the cognitive ego is an ego which must learn to decenter itself with respect to the other's ego. The cognitive ego, at the same time, is not only intellectual, it is ethical. An anthropologist has an ethical and political, at the same time, intellectual cognitive ego. If you have no deontology, you cannot be an anthropologist. So there is an ethical dimension. You don't learn at the university the ethical dimension, not yet. You learn in society. Political ego, you don't learn at the university, not most of the time, in your life. So what it means, political ego, ethical ego, it means that you must maintain yourself in a state of critical vigilance over the ever possible intrusion of judgments your own society has already formulated about other societies. You must maintain yourself in a permanent critical vigilance. So, to decenter oneself is also to suspend one's own judgment, to push back, to push back to the very horizon of consciousness the presupposition of your own culture and society, even the presupposition of your own life story. But the cognitive ego is not made up of ideas only. The anthropologist must engage in a practice called participant observation, in the course of which he immerses himself in another society or another milieu. But now, what does it mean to observe, and what does it mean to observe in participating, and what is participating to what? Participating to what? I did not read the book of postmodern explaining me what is to participate in life of the others. To participate, it is not to go hunting a few days, in order to feed yourself and to feed your friends. To participate in others' life is to do like the others, is to get married with a barouilla, to raise children like a barouilla, is to go hunting every day because they don't buy conserve. They have to produce sweet potatoes every day. So you understand now the difference? We participate very little. We observe a lot. It doesn't mean that you have not understood what it means hunting. But when you know something like the others, you don't produce your concrete life with your knowledge. Anthropologists don't reproduce their concrete life in the field with the knowledge they have acquired of the barouilla. But the barouillas, they every day produce their life concrete with abstract knowledge, knowledge of kinship, knowledge of hunting, and so on. Anthropologists say no, they have the knowledge, they don't produce their concrete life. But it doesn't mean they did not understand, and that is the big mistake of the postmodern. You can understand, like me, kinship system without marrying a barouilla woman. You can expect with whom a young man will get married. It doesn't mean I am wrong, because I am white. It means I have understood, but it is not for me a concrete condition of my life. And because I have understood, I am a good anthropologist in my own society. And maybe in their society, but they don't care. So what is the locus? What is the topos where we do exist as anthropologists? What is the lieu, the topos, the locus? It's an abstract and concrete place. When you are in another society, you are out of your society, but you are still in your society because you are an anthropologist in your society and you do your job. But when you are in the society where you do your job, you are in, but also you are out. So you occupy a very specific place, both concrete and abstract, and that is a construction. You occupy a constructed place, and that is the adventure of the anthropology. A specific place in others' life and in your own life. So, I quit because it's too long for you. I think you are going to sleep soon. Allons-y. Things are okay. So, okay, but now what does it mean to observe? What do we observe? I don't read a book. I read a lot of books. I don't see my colleagues explaining what we observe. What sort of events, relationships we observe. Or there are three things. Every day you observe people eating, pissing, making a lot of things, hunting, coming back at night. It's what I call predictable reproductive events. I mean, they are offered to you to observe, to be observed, offered to you. But they are also, like me, when I was living, you have we can say, non-repetitive event, but predictable. A murder. A man murdering his wife. 3, 4 times I saw that, with all the consequences, social consequences. So that is unpredictable, but we can say we can predict also that it will happen in a society. Second case, second sort of events. Third sort of events. Initiations coming back every 3, 4 years. Mobilizing the whole society, not an individual murdering his wife, but the whole society going through the initiation. Men, women, all generations. I know that. I have to be there. If I'm not there, I miss my job. So, you see, when people say observing, what do they observe? And how they can make knowledge with what they observe. Knowledge, not fiction. Because you have predictable, repetitive, you have unpredictable, you have repetitive, and so on. But it is not enough. If an anthropologist is just sitting waiting for the events, he's not doing his job. You have to do a second, you have to prompt a second kind of observation. You have to launch yourself a large-scale study and survey. For 1 year in the shit, in the rain, you learn something, Well, but also, for more than 1 year, I have done the demographic and kinship studies of 2,500 paroria. You understand what it means to record the genealogies or kinship relationship of 2,500. If you put the genealogies here, it's more than the room. But when you do that systematically, people contradict themselves. People explain that to you, Maurice, you have never understood me. You don't understand nothing. I told you 2 years ago, you don't understand. So every day I was criticized for not being intelligent, Not enough. I told you before, you don't understand? Say, okay, sir. And sometimes I did understand, yes. So when you do that, land tenure, kinship, demography, it is not just sitting with people to smoke. It is to do something that They don't want you every day to be with them. So you have to be accepted. How can you go with people working and you don't work? How can people accept that you are sitting or discussing with them and they are working? That is not a problem of intelligence, it's a problem of sensibility. You understand? I cannot do that with a French peasant. I cannot go to a French village and tell the people, I am sitting with you the other day, working with you. They say, get off, you know. Peace off. Peace off. Yeah. So, you have understood. Yeah? Yeah. So, but now we have to move. You know, it is not enough to do passive and active observations. Passive is never passive. You know what I mean? Offered. People offer their life. They live, and so their life is for you something. And also you organize something systematically to understand kinship, to understand long tenure, to understand myth, to understand initiation. It takes more than 2 weeks with the Figaro. It's not a newspaper job. It's not a job for journalists. You come for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. If you come, it is for 3 years or 6 years. So you have to get the money for that. A good wife or no wife, it's better even, and so on. You understand what it means, the job of anthropologists, if you have to stay long time with people. It's not just a matter of 6 months. And, okay, so now, look, you have also different levels. When I recorded the terminology of kinship, immediately I understood that the Baroya, they have the same kinship terminology as the Iroquois, the so-called Iroquois structure. But the Iroquois structure is matrilineal descent, and the Baroya, it is patrilineal descent. So here you have to move to another level, which has no interest for a Baroya. Is to compare societies with Iroquois kinship systems. For the Baroya, they don't care. If you tell a Baroya, oh, you have a nice Iroquois kinship system, they say, has no interest in life. No interest for them. They don't get money for that, they don't. It's okay. So even if they understand what it means, Iroquois kinship system, so it does not mean that my question was wrong. It does not mean that moving to this level of analysis is bad, or is vacuum, or is empty, nonsense. Because we have still to understand why there are so few kinship systems in the world. We have many kinship varieties, but not more than 7, 8 big kinship structures. Why? We don't know. That is another level of knowledge, theoretical level of knowledge. If you don't want to ask the question, you are free of that. But why to not ask the question, why the same kind of system can appear in, for instance, the European kinship system is very close to the Eskimo kinship system or the Garia of New Guinea? Why is it possible that the same structure can appear here and there without any contact? Historical. It's as difficult to understand that as the atomic structure of the world. But that is not atomic structure of the world. It is something of social life. Okay, so now I want to finish with a few points more. I spend a lot of time to deconstruct kinship. So I published a huge book. It is not published in English, so you cannot read it. But it will come, it will come. The Americans, they asked me 42,000 euro to publish the book because they don't pay anymore. we have to subsidize les États-Unis, n'est-ce pas? We have to pay for them. No? Anyway, so it will come sometime. So, among the few results for myself, for my life as an anthropologist, the first, one of the first was to discover for myself the presence and the role at the heart of all social relationships of what I call imaginary cores. Imaginary cores. Let me explain. I take you a very simple example. What is a patrilineal society? It's a society in which you claim that you descend from ancestors only through males. Okay? Matrilineal only through females. It's purely imaginary. It's purely imaginary. So at the core of kinship structure, you have an imaginary presupposition. But the consequences of imaginary presuppositions is never imaginary. The consequences of imaginary presupposition are social. Distribution of children and so on, appropriation of children by the clan of a man or by the clan of a mother. That is not imaginary. And also, if you are in a patrilineal society, you have a lot of representation giving a symbolic life to the imaginary core. So, what is symbol? Symbolism is to make into practice and to make into social relationship which is purely invisible, imaginary. The initiation, for instance. I have been through the initiation of the Barouya, as you know. I have filmed them. I have asked, what is a baby for you? So they explained me, the baby is made from the sperm, the semen. Okay. Not quite, Maurice, not quite. The man is only making the body, but not the fingers, not the nose. So who is making the nose and the fingers? Numwe, the sun, the God. God is making in the belly of women, transforming a fetus into a child. A fetus into a child. And after they explain me, Maurice, is not enough. When the child is born, if he is a boy, he has to be reborn, like Bush, you know, reborn. Huh? But it's not the same way as Bush, because you have to initiate and to give the sperm of the boys between 15 and 20 in the men's house. They inseminate the young boys to eliminate what is female and to make their body completely male with sperm. Sperm from men, young men, who have not made love with girls, not yet, because they are not married yet. They are not supposed to have sexual intercourses. But it's purely imaginary to give sperm to make a boy reborn. But it is practice, a social relationship, erotic, and so on, and it's symbolic. If you have not the idea that you have to reborn the children, boys, not girls, you don't have this symbolic practice and erotic dimensions and so on. So you understand. So now more and more I work on imaginary content of social relationships. I have no problem with all these things, opposition of anthropologists before, between ideological view of things. It's all bullshit, you know. Now, the second, if I was going to say that there is a primauté, primacy, Lévi-Strauss was always saying primacy of the symbolic, la primauté du symbolique. I say no, primauté de l'imaginaire sur le symbolique. And Geertz was right on that. It's the primacy of imaginary through symbolic practices. and science. And for Lévi-Strauss, it was always the primat du symbolique. No, it's the primat de l'imaginaire. But the real primat, the real primacy is the social deals. Because really, what is the problem through initiations? For instance, the problem is to establish the man and the boys as the only one able to govern the society, to dominate women. So the real problem is not the primacy of imaginary, it's the primacy of man on women. You understand? The real problem is a social problem, finally, created by, through these relationships and representations. Who has access to land? Who is controlling land? Who is controlling the children for marriage? Who is controlling the women? That is a real primacy, finally, and not the imaginary and the symbolic. So for me, it was very important. The second big work I did when I was reconstructing was when I worked on the gift. As you know, I have published a book, it is in German and so on. And I was surprised when I re-studied the problem to see that Lévi-Strauss and Mauss and Lévi-Strauss, they've completely eliminated something. They always oppose things you give and counter-give, or things you sell. They forgot the third case, things you don't give and you don't sell, and you keep for yourselves to transmit. So in fact, there is a third category, completely neglected except by people dealing with so-called sacred objects. Sacred objects you don't give to your neighbor. But sacred objects is not only religious object. And that was very interesting for me. Because the French constitution or the German constitution is not a marchandise, is not a commodity. You cannot sell a constitution, faire façon. You cannot. What you buy is the votes of the people. Corruption, electoral corruption in France, everywhere. You don't buy la Constitution française. It's not a marchandise, not at all a commodity. And you do not give, you keep for yourself. If you stop the Constitution, you become to start a dictature or something else. So, what is so-called things you don't give and keep for yourself to transmit is not only the sacred, except if you say that sacredness is not only religion. If you extend the category of sacredness to the political. In some societies you can, not in all societies. And so I am going to give you the last example. There was something very important for me in the field. And I had a long discussion with Prof also. The barriers, they explained me one day, because I was writing the history, we can say the history of the barrier. So the barrier explained me, Maurice, we were not existing before. We were not existing as the barrier before. I say, so what were you? So they explained me, Maurice, we came from another society, the Yoyue people. There was a massacre. We fled, and we were refugees somewhere. Where? Among the Angers, I knew the tribes and so on. So I said, how did you become the barrier as a society? Controlling a territory. And somebody gave me immediately the answer. And I could not understand the answer when he gave me the answer. It took me 2 years before understanding, because I reconstructed the process, but the chap, better than any professor of university, gave me the answer. So the answer was, Maurice, we began to be the barrier, to become the barrier, when we constructed the chinia. The chinia is the big mix house, the big initiation house. Let me, because now I am tired, so I cannot stand up. So, the big initiation house in which you initiate every 3 years the boys to become warriors or shamans and so on, so on. So in his own language and with his own categories, he explained me what was a society. A society is when you establish sovereignty on a territory, and he explained me. I translate into French or German concept because Western concept. He explained me, in fact, translated into European concept, that you establish a new society through politico-religious relationships, not through economy and kinship. Kinship is not the base of society. It's a bullshit. I have read in books, you know, the family is the base of the society. If the family is going, the society is gone. Stupid. The family is never, even in so-called kin-based societies, so the anthropologists have invented the concept of kin-based society. A society cannot be based on kinship. Kinship divides and unifies, but never overlap and embed everybody. Only politico-religious relationships can do that, not kinship. Even in our society, you know, the German state is encompassing, and not the German family, you know. The French, it is the same. It is not because we have a separation of state and church in Europe, in some countries, but before, all the societies were created through the mixture of political, why I say political and religious? Because religious means that the gods, the spirits of the ancestors are all in the initiation process, they are with you and so on, you dance, you chant and so on. You mark the bodies and so on, okay. And you say, you do that when you are a barrier, you do. And I send my spirit to the sun. So if you are in the initiation, always you are doing that with the sun. And you call the sun Numwe. Numwe means father. Father. Okay? Oh, okay, so. But at the same time, it is political because you establish the superiority of men on women. And second, you establish the superiority of the clans who killed their host and took over, and you reconstruct the political superiority of the refugees. They have taken over the territory of their host. So it's very clear, very clear. So, when I discussed with Frobenius, you remember Frobenius went to Tikopia in 1928. The first missionary came in 1924. In 1928, there was no change. Nothing changed. After he went 3 times more, and today, most of the people are in Los Angeles, okay? Okay, d'accord. But what was going on in Tikopia? Tikopia was not existing. The people explained to Frobenius, Tikopia was not existing when? 2, 3, 4 centuries before. It wasn't existing. There were groups of people coming from Oton Java, Puka Puka, and fighting. And it is one chap. It means one clan, the Kafika clan. One chap who succeeded to establish a sort of common life. Through rituals, he organized the rituals of fertility, for everything, and he gave a place to each group within the framework of rituals. And when Frobenius came, He saw the rituals acting, and he saw that the Tekafiki Arika, c'est-à-dire the chief of the Kafika clan, being the first chief. And he asked, why you are the first chief and not the other three chiefs? 4 clans, 4 chiefs. And the chap explained, my ancestor became the god of Tikopia. He died, he was assassinated after the peace between groups. Assassinated. But the gods gave him the status of god. He became Atua. Atua means in Polynesian, means god. So his ancestor became the god of the island, and so he was himself a god with a mana of a god. So he explained to Firth that the society became a society when political religious structure were established, with his ancestor at the top of the rituals. Now, look, last example. Saudi Arabia was not existing. Saudi Arabia existed when? 1742. The beginning of the state of Arabia was 1742-46. Before there was no state in Central Arabia. How it became Saudi Arabia today, so important? The encounter of 2 people. You know, Muhammad al-Wahhab, Wahhabism, everybody speaks of Wahhabism today, and Muhammad bin Saud, the ancestor of the Saud. One was a reformer. He wanted to develop the jihad against the bad Muslims. The bad Muslims in La Mecca and Medina. He was expelled from his tribe. They did not want him. And he was accepted by Mohammed bin Saud. And he was a sheikh, local sheikh in a small bourgade, a small town called Daria. These 2 people, they joined together. One, the Islamic reformer, wanted military power, and the other need Islamic justification to conquer the others. What does it mean? Religion and politics, power. So they conquer. 1802 and 1804, they conquer the center of Islamic world, La Mecca and Medina. So the Sultan was not pleased. He sent a Bosniak, Muhammad Ali, who was governor of Egypt. He sent to Daria, and so they chopped the head of some of the family of Saud. And they reconstruct the state. And in 1938, the small state of Arabia Saudi, no, the Arabie Saoudite, in 1938, they discovered petrol. You know what it means, petrol? Okay. Oil. And also the 4th of the reserve mondial. In 1945, you don't know, Eisenhower signed a pact. 1945. Your petrol is for us, but we protect you against Iran and Iraq. Okay? Now, do you know that 15 of the terrorists of the 11th of September were from Arabia Saudi, and they were all Wahhabite. And so, again, political religious relationships. It gives power if you capture, for me, I am not a Muslim, the imaginary core of the Islamic world. 1 billion and more of people believing in the Prophet. Petrol plus Prophet is a lot, you know. It's power. So you see, we can do the same job today, not only in New Guinea. I tell you, all the Baoya are Christians. today. One of my assistants went to the Barouya a couple of weeks ago, and they are all Christians. When I was there was only one. Now they are all Christians, and they believe in the revival. So they are revivalists. At the same time, they have reconstructed last year the initiation house. So they make their own mixture. Back to the initiation, and so when I discussed with the Barouya last time, they explained me, we want to become new men. Say, okay, so what does it mean to be a new man for you, Barouya? And a young man told me, we have to, behind Jesus, to follow Jesus, and making business. So the Barouya are global now. Behind Jesus, making business, they are modern people, you know. Jesus plus business is fantastic. You know? So, you understand now why I don't believe that we are living the end of anthropology. We are able, anthropologists, to understand the transformation, the role of imaginary content, the social consequences for the masses of people of that, you know. Because for the people, all what I have said to you, they are existential truths. They are not scientific truths, they are existential. They do live, they do suffer for their truths. So they are existential truths, very different. But the existential questions in different societies, I tell you, the answers are different, but the questions are more or less the same. When I was discussing, it was always, what does it mean to be born? What does it mean to live? What does it mean for us to die? What is going on after death? What are the spirits in the nature, in the forest? What is a forest? I think all these questions, all the countries, all the societies ask the same question, but they exist, the answers are totally different, and they are existential truth for the people. It doesn't mean scientific truths. You understand? And so I think now in the global world in which we are, it would be irresponsible. And even, I should say, I speak like a Protestant, indecent, to renounce to anthropology. It's impossible. Our duty is to continue and to reconstruct or to develop in a more reflexive, more critical and more analytical way our disciplines. And you know, if you go now to Korea, I was in Korea, invited by the academy 3 years ago, you have a lot of anthropologists. You go to China now, you have a lot of anthropologists. They develop anthropology. They are not, very often they leave postmodernist books, so they try to understand what is going on in the mind of Western people. But in fact, they have accepted that anthropology could be useful for themselves, to understand themselves, and even us. So it's not the end of anthropology. I think it is a new stage, a new development, and a critical one, and that is fine. Okay?